Hey everybody, Eric Switzer here for The Gamer, here with another episode of Your Favorite Game, joined by your favorite co-hosts, George Foster, and The Gamer's Editor-in-Chief Stacey Henley.
Hello.
That won't track with the podcast version, but video watchers will know.
George's miming will become clearer when we get into the show.
Yes, today's Your Favorite Game is with no dialogue, and before we reveal our favorite games, I'm cautiously optimistic, slightly nervous for this one. This show, sort of as a rule, we don't tell each other what our games are going to be each week. You might have picked up on that last week when we did escort missions, and George brought a game that does not have escort missions. But when we say your favorite game with no dialogue, that is potentially a very broad topic. I think if you want to be cute about it, you could say Tetris. I have been thinking about games where the fact that they don't have dialogue is important to the experience. It's a designed function of the game rather than a byproduct of the genre of game it happens to be. And I'm hoping you've both done the same, but I'm excited to see if maybe we're just going to talk about Balatro and Vampire Survivors for an hour.
I
feel like this is all directed at me.
Slightly differently. I have gone for a thing where there's notably no dialogue, but rather than one where it necessarily is a byproduct of the story it's telling, I've gone for a narrative game that I think could have been told with dialogue, but that I think is more interesting without it. I've still gone for a story-based game. I don't necessarily think having no dialogue in the one I'm going to speak about is necessarily crucial to its makeup, but I think it makes for a more interesting experience. So I think mine fits the parameter of this is a game that noticeably has no dialogue as opposed to a game that has no character, like Tetris.
Yes. Games where no dialogue was a creative choice.
Yes, that's the best way to put it, I think.
And I think that's interesting, and the reason that we sort of brought that forward, it makes me think a lot about the silent film era, and where at a time when the limitations of technology shaped the way that stories were told and films were made, video games sort of had that too.
Yeah.
Back in ye olden days when there weren't Sound Blaster cards in the Commodore 64s, they also had to work around those limitations. And I think that they largely did that by just not having stories in their games.
Yeah.
God, you're old.
Asteroid doesn't have much of a narrative to it. But I like when a game can have sound, a modern game can have dialogue and chooses not to, and sort of exploring why they made that choice. So, without further ado, Stacey, what is your favorite game with no dialogue?
Well, my favorite game with no dialogue is also actually a game with no title, because it is Untitled Goose Game.
Lovely. Yes.
Obviously, it honks. That's the main thing you can do. The characters do make noises. I think it's supposed to be like a kind of... because you play as the goose, you're hearing humans as a goose would. You don't make out the noises, you just kind of make out big emotions. And I think rather than the silent movie era, I guess they're kind of in a way the same era. It's more kind of vaudeville. It's very slapstick in its humor. It's got a lot of really expressive body language and movements. And I really like that Untitled Goose Game is, for people who haven't played it, you play as a slightly angry goose who goes all the way around a village causing various bits of mischief. There's always... You need to get a key for a door. You need to find a way to climb over a fence or distract somebody who's going to hit you with the rake. But it's basically just going around in a big circle through a little English village. And I think, even though that's not a particularly interesting story, it manages to be very funny because it sets up a lot of almost kind of Mr. Bean if he was a goose kind of scenarios.
Sure, yeah.
Sometimes the goose is very deliberately... I guess mean-spirited might be the word. But other times it's just
That's
kind of
geese.
doing what a goose.
Awful.
Yeah, exactly. Other times it's kind of doing what a goose does and trying to find a way to get through the cabbage patch of things. So I kind of toyed with. I won't go into too much depth because you guys might have picked some of these games, or I know at the end of the show we always discuss some kind of highlights that we didn't get to. So I thought of a few, I guess, more moving or emotional stories that didn't have much dialogue in them, but I felt like I was kind of picking them to be, I don't know.
Highbrow.
Basically, yeah. I was going to say cooler, then I realized there's nothing cool about these games. But yeah,
So everyone knows how smart you are?
basically, yeah. And I thought, no, that actually the
Couldn't be
experience that I
me.
had the most fun with was Untitled Goose Game. And I think what's a really big thing for me, just with any game, is the ability to play with other people, kind of the memories that you have of playing those games. I always hold that my favorite console is the Wii, which obviously doesn't run Untitled Goose Game, but the reason it's the Wii is not because of Super Mario Galaxy or Skyward Sword or any other kind of big hits they have on there, but because I remember playing it with my family. It's the only console that I've successfully been able to get my family to play for an elongated period of time. And also, I think I've written about this for the site before a while ago. One of my favorite overall gaming experiences was playing Sonic Forces. Now that's a bad game, even by Sonic standards.
Yeah.
That's a bad game. But I remember I was at a friend's house. There was 4 of us, and we just played from start to finish in one day. Just if you die, you pass the controller along, just like you would when you were a kid. And having that togetherness when playing a game, I think makes for a better experience than just playing the game itself. Those same friends are like, should we play Astro Bot? And I'm like, no, because I want us to all play together, so you have to wait, because I've already played it, so I'm not going to wait. You have to wait.
Mm-hmm.
And I played Untitled Goose Game with my partner, with my wife. And that, to me, made, even though it's not really a 2-player game, that made it a much more enjoyable experience. And it's because it has these old-style comedy movie tone aesthetics. It felt like when you kind of sit down and watch, because we're of that age, watch The Simpsons on repeat, and it kind of had that kind of feeling to it, It has, obviously The Simpsons is very, very dialogue heavy. One of its best aspects is its line writing, but it's always very well animated, and you've got a lot of really interesting stuff going on in terms of just how it builds different forms of comedy, and I think Untitled Goose Game really taps into that. So that's why it stands out to me.
Yeah, I love that you compared it to vaudeville. That's such a perfect way to describe it. The storytelling in that game is almost like comedy vignettes.
Yes.
When you're doing laps around a garden to turn off a farmer's water, and then he chases you in a circle until he loses you, and then you sneak back around and turn off the water. It's almost like Chip and Dale terrorizing Donald Duck in an old Disney short, which that comes from that vaudeville tradition. So that's such a perfect example of what I was trying to set up at the beginning of this episode, and I did not even think of Goose Game because
I didn't,
because it almost feels like it belongs in that like Tetris Balatro category.
Absolutely. You play as a goose who it's a normal goose, has no ability to speak. It just honks when you push a button.
Yeah, and it almost feels like, well, what would dialogue have even added?
Yeah.
To that, like why would there be? Like, is it a creative choice or is it just a byproduct of the kind of game it is? But then when you experience the way that it presents the comedy, it's like, no, this is very much was a creative choice, and they leaned into kind of a history of that kind of comedy. And great choice.
Absolutely. I mean, it's quite similar to Thank Goodness You're Here. I know, George, you played
I thought of that. Yeah.
Obviously, that's very, very dialogue heavy, but I think because they're so similar, that shows how you could have done Untitled Goose Game. Even though the goose didn't understand, you could have had a lot of jokes for the audience to get, and that's maybe it's not harder to write. It's certainly a different skill, and I'm glad they went in this direction where they don't need to kind of put a hat on a hat. Like, it's funny when this happens. I don't need to be told it's funny. And there's one scene as well where you have to get a woman a flower to get I can't remember what reward exactly you need from her, but it's not all just kind of terrorizing people. You can choose to be nice to a couple of people, and then she claps and she rewards you, and it's kind of that. I think there's other developers who would have made that into too much of a schmaltzy moment where it's kind of like, this is a wholesome game, kindness to animals. And I think the fact that they let it play out and you can just kind of honk while she's there, and she kind of goes, I like when the goose honks, yeah, adds to the kind of the humor that it's putting up. So I think it's a different style of writing. I think it's bolder to have no dialogue. So it was a pretty near the top of my list when I was kind of thinking of games I could pick, and I felt I had the most to say about it.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
All right, George.
Okay, the one you've all been waiting for. My favorite game with no dialogue is Journey.
Oh,
so to go highbrow, I think that's an obvious pick. To be honest, I when you were saying about highbrow Stace, I figured Journey was probably on that list.
Mm-hmm.
But I want you to take your mind back to 2012. Okay. You have was it 2012 or 2011?
We'll
go 2012.
Know if you're discussing the game.
yeah, we'll say 2012. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong.
Were you born?
Yes, I was born. But you have to imagine an even less developed George, a George who doesn't have the great taste of Psychonauts. And actually, I did.
Pubescent George.
That's not true. But you played Psychonauts back then.
I did, but I didn't have I didn't have the capacity to love them like I do now, to know them on like a design level. You get the point.
Yeah, I think that's
so
fair.
I'd heard of this
game.
When
you're a kid, you play games and they're just funny because they're colourful, you have fun, I enjoy them. I think the more you play, you enjoy them for how they're made. Yeah, that's fair.
So something highbrow like Journey, not really for me. Like I'd seen it was coming out, and I saw it got 10 out of 10s. I saw it got really good reviews. It's like, it's really cheap on PlayStation Store. I'll give it a try. And I knew nothing about it except that you're on a journey, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And going in there and discovering the only thing you can do really to interact with the world besides jump and slide is to sing. So you have no dialogue, you just sing. You like hum a note, it expels out of you. That was cool. I was like, this is interesting. I'll see where this goes. And then the moment you run into another player for the first time, something I didn't know about, all you can do with them is sing at one another. And even though it's not dialogue, you still feel like you're communicating with them. And you still kind of, because the objective is so simple, you still feel like you're getting across your point. You still kind of form a bond with this person. And I remember I did it all in one go. The whole game I just played in one go. And I think I was with the same person the whole time, just going across. I don't know, it's been so long, I don't know if that's how it works in Journey, that you do stick one person or you jump in and out.
I'm not sure actually between scenes, because obviously you have some scenes alone. I'm actually not sure if it's always the same person or if it's a new person each time.
Yeah, I think they distinguish with like the scarf, like maybe you have different patterns. So I remember seeing people, like you'd skip to another scene, like you say, there's someone you're on your own, and then they come back, oh my god, it's the person I was just with.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember so vividly the ending of that game where you get to wherever you're supposed to be going. It's this beautiful landscape. I was just in tears. I was with this person who I'd just been singing at for like an hour and a half, just navigating this weird world, just exploring, singing at each other. And I just felt so grateful. It was this really weird feeling. I think it was the first time, to my knowledge, where I felt something that was like a deeper connection with a game. You know, that was it for me. And that's all done with no dialogue. That's all done just through the journey you have with another player. And I thought that was so cool. I still do.
Journey's often described as sort of a spiritual experience.
It's an experience. That's really like arsey to say, but it is an experience. I don't think calling it a game does it justice.
That's sort of one of the quintessential no dialogue games for sure. And I think
I got it right this time. Yeah.
There's kind of, I think it's maybe you would consider it a trilogy of Journey, Abzu, and The Pathless.
Yeah, Abzu did come to mind as well, but Journey just has like a special place for me.
Yeah,
I think
to tie it back to that, the idea of like the silent film. I think that a big part of what drives the storytelling in Journey is the music.
Yes, absolutely.
Which was, essential to pre-talkies. The music was like replace the dialogue. It did tell you how to feel, what people were thinking, the highs and the lows, and that's certainly true for Journey too. I think that like that score is so moving and such an important part of that experience.
Yeah. Someone's seen
And
that
you're always
land.
adding to it as well with that sing button. Like that's why it's there. You're just adding to the
Yeah.
score. You're kind of making it your own. Like I never get like this really. Like go emotional and deep and experiencey, but that's just how Journey makes you feel.
I
Like
know
it's,
we wind you up about your age, but how old actually were you when it came out? Let's say it was 2012.
I was either 12 or 13.
Because I thought knowing the age you're now, I thought that would have been about right. That's pretty plugged in, I think, for a kid to be in game and to know of a game, not just because it looks certainly more than I was that age, not because it has cool box art, not because some older kid at school said it was good, but because you saw that it was this really gentle indie game was getting really high reviews, so you decided to check it out. Because I know you said it was the first game that you felt kind of drawn into with, but I wonder if Journey is one of those games where you kind of need to be willing to be drawn into, because I think these days the average kind of 11 or 12-year-old playing the kind of games that they play, I don't know if they would be as drawn into Journey. And not necessarily kids these days, even kids 10 years ago when you were that age. I don't think kids who are kind of very casual game players, or maybe don't really play games at all, would necessarily be as moved by that. I think it takes probably... To be honest, I know that we usually say the opposite about you. It probably takes quite a mature mindset at that age to go on to do a game where you say nothing and do nothing and feel emotionally moved by it. And I think that game company who made the game, obviously they did Flower, they did Children of the Sky as well. They've always built this output around quite peaceful games that don't necessarily have a clear objective. And I think Journey is obviously the most iconic of those, but they've always really wanted to zone in on a new way of playing. I know you said it's almost not a video game; it's something else entirely. I'm never too sure how I feel about that, because I think sometimes it kind of makes us think games can only be a certain type of thing. I know exactly what you mean by it.
Yeah.
But I think it's interesting that they tend to only really make those games, and for you to have played it at a young age and to have been so kind of drawn into it that it's stayed with you. I thought, to be honest, you were going to say I played it, thought it was a load of rubbish, and I came back when I was older and liked it. So I think that's a really, really interesting pick, and I hope that other people had. I played as well. I like Journey, but I hope other people kind of had that experience of being drawn into it. But I do wonder if it requires you to want a different sort of game.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that, because to this day I've never replayed Journey. I've had that one playthrough, and it's like that feeling of re-experiencing it could never get close to that first
absolutely.
time.
It's special. I think there's sometimes more value in that than a game that you replay over and over and over again.
Absolutely, yeah.
I believe that it remains the fastest selling PSN game of all time as well.
Really?
Wow, really?
Yeah, and I think there's a bit of a caveat, because that came from an era, the Xbox Arcade PSN game era, where we treated things that didn't have a physical release as if it was a different kind of game.
Mm.
In a way, it's a shame we've left that era behind. I think when you look at how much games are, and they kind of push towards games that need you to play 100 hours, it is a bit of a shame that we don't still live in the kind of... Gamecast, I guess, tried to bring it back a bit, and Hi-Fi Rush, which I know George is a massive fan of, is kind of in the vein of that. But you're right, it's not really there anymore.
Yeah, and they were treated... They were held to high esteem by the publishers, and like really put out there. Like Journey was advertised everywhere, was put out there, was something Sony was really proud of. And I guess the equivalent of that today would be something like Helldivers, which is a completely different kind. It's might as well be a AAA game.
Yeah,
Stray, an indie game.
Yeah,
best indie
Stray's
the
a good
Game
example.
Awards that was pushed by Sony exclusively, and
one I never understood.
Yeah,
it was an indie game by an indie studio, but it had a different backing, definitely.
Right.
And I can remember that being a big... I mean, I mentioned Flower. Flower was a really, really big thing with the PS3. It was like, you only get Flower on the PS3, and it was just like, you fly a petal around. I remember playing that while being quite
Flower.
immature and
Yeah,
thinking,
I like Flower.
this isn't Batman.
Yeah.
It's Batman.
See, I did think of Flower as well. That did come to mind, but I felt with Flower, there's just not really dialogue of any kind. With Journey, it's a purposeful choice to
Yeah, I
not have
think-
dialogue and have singing.
Flower comes into the category that Eric mentioned before of
Yeah.
Tetris. Obviously,
Like
it's a very
first Crash
soothing
Bandicoot,
game. It's a
sorry.
little different from Tetris because it's designed to be relaxing in a way that Tetris is not. But I do think Journey is a really, really strong choice for this. In fact, I think if you hadn't mentioned Journey, I'm sure we would have kind of got around to needing to mention Journey as part of this. What about you, Eric? What's your favorite game with no dialogue?
My favorite game with no dialogue, probably not a huge surprise, is Metroid Prime.
Does Metroid Prime have no dialogue?
The original Metroid Prime. Yes, and I think that it is essential to the experience of Metroid Prime that it has no dialogue, in fact, which is why it's my choice. It's not only is it one of my favorite games ever, but it's my favorite game with no dialogue. Metroid Prime and just Metroid in general, I think, is a series marked by its atmosphere. That's what it does better than anything else, and it does that in a lot of different ways. Music's a big part of it, but isolation is a big part of it. That feeling of being alone on a hostile alien planet. There is no backup. There's nobody's going to help you, and later Metroids have gotten away from that. And that's a lot of where the criticism has come from like some of the later Metroid games. But I think Metroid Prime really nails that feeling. And it does that by putting you on this strange planet you know nothing about, where you are learning about its history through, documentation, by reading about a society that does not exist anymore, and by not having another character there to bounce ideas off of, or an old man to tell you about that history. It is such a more impactful experience. It makes that feeling of this is a dead world and I'm alone in it and I'm very much in danger so much stronger. And I just really loved learning about the Chozo and what happened there, and sort of unraveling the mysteries of that game, without having to rely on somebody telling you the story. I think it's such a cool approach to a game that actually does have a lot of story and a lot to learn about, like sort of rich lore and details, with no dialogue at all.
Yeah, I think it's very different to mine and George's choice. I think with both of ours, you would be kind of looking at where do you add dialogue in, like what do the characters in Journey say? What would the villagers say? Like, how does that actually aid the story? But with Metroid, with Prime, it's very easy to kind of see where the dialogue would come in. You have a kind of what do you call it? Have like a Jarvis in your head saying like, "Oh, this is the remains of," and then they explain things to you. Or there's another someone else who's kind of stranded there who knows a little bit about the local fauna and flora and can kind of warn you of things. I do think it's a really interesting choice, and I think there's a bit of a trend these days. When we talk about games as being notebook games, people said it about Elden Ring a lot. Kind of, you need a notepad with you. And I've never been too, I guess, interested in that side of things. I don't like to play a game with a notepad next to me, basically. I don't really like making notes when I have to do a review. I do it, but certainly when I'm playing a game casually, it's not something that I'm too mindful of. But I think Metroid Prime really offers a way to do that in a way that, I played it and didn't use a notepad, so I'm slightly talking rubbish. But I think it's the kind of game that I could see enjoying as a notepad game, because there's the right amount of lore that it's not really in the way that Elden Ring is very kind of arcane and obtruse. It's not really a complex story in that sense. Like you could write the plot of Metroid Prime and it has a beginning, middle, and end, right? Like the stuff happened before you got there, but the plot I don't think is as kind of what theory can we make about what these last words mean in the way that games like Elden Ring or that we call notepad games. And I think that really, I guess, helps the lack of dialogue. The fact that once you kind of get around the story, you really are learning it as you go through. You don't feel like you are getting fragments of a larger story. You feel like over time you are getting the story. You know, like you play it and you piece it together. And I think that's why it's a strength.
Is the whole Metroid Prime trilogy no dialogue, or was it just the first one?
Just the first one. It is sparing, but there are characters and there's like holograms where you're watching a scene play out from the past where characters are talking. There is some dialogue in the other ones,
and it's
there's none. Yes.
Yeah, I wonder if they'll do that for 4, but because I remember I haven't really played Prime properly. Like, I need to properly play that. I know it's one of your favorites, Eric, but I did play a good bit of Dread, and there was some. There's
a lot of dialogue.
There's a lot of dialogue in there.
Yeah.
It didn't hold me that one.
The Metro, and it sounds weird to say the Metroidvanias because they're all Metroidvanias by virtue of the fact that they're all Metroids, but the kind of the 2D jump on platforms, fine. I think they tend. Eric is a bigger expert than me, but I think they tend to give you a lot more information because it's harder to kind of sell atmosphere. There tends to be more lore entries or you have a little Jarvis or something like that. Whereas Prime is a lot more, I don't know, foreboding maybe is the word I would use.
Yeah, they all have the sort of Star Wars crawl, like pre the sort of intro. Yeah. But it's really only the older ones. Even Super Metroid, if I remember correctly, has some dialogue. But yeah, I think Metroid 2 and Prime really stand out for how their stories are told with that, and not just the way their stories are told, but like the way that you solve puzzles, the way that you learn how to interact with the environment. There's no little NPC tutorial guy there, to say this is how you morph ball or whatever. It's like it's tonally consistent in that way.
It's interesting because there's been a lot of discussion about Prime, especially with the remake remaster just come out on Switch, and I don't feel like that gets discussed a lot. The controls get discussed, the sound, and you mentioned music. I think the sound design a lot as well, because it's an empty, kind of very echoey world. Feel it's kind of got an alien with a capital A, as in the movie, kind of an alien feel to some of the sound design. I think it's very metallic, and I guess it's kind of almost kind of nasty ASMR is kind of what I would compare it to.
Sure.
But I don't see a lot of discussion specifically about the lack of dialogue, and certainly not in the way that you can't really talk about Journey without mentioning the fact that it doesn't use dialogue. It's to kind of open. I think that's a really interesting pick.
And I never even knew that Metroid Prime had no dialogue, so that is a learning experience for me.
I think it makes it feel like a much more like serious and mature kind of story, because Metroid is about a space woman that fights a dinosaur, but if Ridley was like shaking his fist and going, "I'll get you next time, Samus," it would be a very different game, even if that was the only thing that was different, right? even if the only thing that was different was like Ridley like talk shit, it would be a completely different kind of game. It would turn into a Saturday morning cartoon, and Metroid is very much not that at all. It is Alien, right? So
Good pick.
I think that's an important part of that game. I have a lot more that I'd like to touch on, and I've been thinking about sort of the different genres of dialogue-free games, and so we've talked about the Journey style, the adventure games that are, I would almost call them music driven, I think.
Yeah, I think that's definitely fair in Journey's case.
And I was also thinking about the different kinds of puzzle games where a lack of dialogue actually is meaningful. So all of the Myst style games.
Yeah.
And I kind of relate those to Metroid Prime, this idea of being alone and exploring this world and having to figure it out by yourself. One I wanted to touch on that I'm not sure. I wanted to get your take if you're familiar with the game, but Gorogoa. Have either of you played Gorogoa?
It's the space game, right?
No, it's a puzzle game where you are moving through paintings. It's like
No.
the world.
I think I'm
gets
thinking
deeper
of Galaga.
We'll move on. This one's fun. Maybe you guys thought about this. All the Lego games.
Well, I would think of the classic ones, not
the modern ones.
The good ones, yeah. I didn't think of that. That's such a really good choice.
Everything before Lego Batman 2 had they told their stories through pantomime and that sort of back to that vaudeville kind of thing.
Struggling to remember that. I can what's coming to mind really are the modern, Avengers and the Skywalker thing. I've played a few. I played like Pirates of the Caribbean way back in the day, but I don't.
Yeah, like the old Star Wars ones, they would do all the famous Star Wars scenes, but with no dialogue.
So like the Luke, I am your father bit, he's pointing at a picture of himself.
Yeah,
and it's great. Yeah, I didn't think of that.
Picture. Yeah, they have really funny ways of reimagining those scenes with no dialogue. But now you think of like the Lego movie and like the humor of, like the Lego Batman movie.
Yeah.
There's a specific humor that Lego seems to have now that is part of the games, but it used to be completely different.
Yeah.
Every day is a school day.
Yeah. I was also thinking about horror. And I think that there's a nice little collection of no dialogue horror games. The big one probably is Limbo.
Yeah.
Yes, and Inside.
Limbo and Inside, yeah. And then that sort of spawns off into Little Nightmares too.
Ooh.
Another series with no dialogue. And that I guess I will also connect back to Metroid Prime. It's about building an atmosphere. Those games seem to be scarier without dialogue. You could have a creature whispering, you could have people saying scary stuff, but they seem to be more effective because they don't have dialogue.
Yeah, I think we've all played horror games where the dialogue kind of feels quite clunky and takes you out of it a little bit. Which made me think of, oh my god, what's it called? The Bluebird Team one.
The Medium?
The Medium, yeah. I was going to say the middle, and it wasn't that. The Medium has a lot of examples where the characters speak and you think, maybe you should.
Is that what you would say?
Yeah. But I don't know if Layers of Fear is entirely dialogueless, but I am a big defender of Layers of Fear. I think that has... That does an atmosphere really, really well. I think the character talks to themselves. So it's not no dialogue.
Even the running baby scene.
See, the running baby scene it's
I love that. That's my favorite video on the
internet. It's become like the meme of Little Nightmares and not Little Nightmares, Layers of Fear. And I don't remember playing it and having the baby just kind of thunk off the cardboard and then keep going. I think it's the kind of thing that happens more if you're playing it kind of for stream and in that kind of environment.
Yeah.
Like, it's obviously a very stupid thing. I'm not gonna say that everything Bluebird Team makes is fantastic, or that Layers of Fear is a must-play horror experience. I just have more affection for it than...
It is sad that that's like the thing. That is the Layers of Fear thing, right?
But that's what I mean with dialogue, though. Like, if you are trying to create a spooky horror atmosphere and just one character says the wrong thing, it's ruined.
Yeah.
Like we were discussing Resident Evil last week for escort missions, Resident Evil 4. And even though we all love Resident Evil 4, we all have a lot of affection for that game and that series, the one thing we all remember from it is, oh, save me, Leon! Because that takes you out of it. Like, that's the thing that happens when you add dialogue to a scene. It really risks taking you out of it. Obviously, the downside is it's much harder to tell a story, especially once you are starting in kind of complex lore at the level of Metroid, without dialogue. But I think horror games that don't use it and still manage to be scary and narrative, I think that's a real skill.
Yeah, and I think that perfectly describes Limbo.
Yeah.
And Inside. I guess Inside even more. Yeah. And then another, I think in the same vein, but a game I didn't pick because we've be talking about it a lot this year's Animal Well.
I was waiting for you to say Animal Well. That was like my number 2.
Yeah.
I love Animal Well.
Yeah, I mean, why would you have dialogue in that game, right?
Yeah, would not work.
Another example of a really, really strong story.
Yes.
Yeah.
Stronger because
absolutely.
you figured out for yourself. There's not someone going, maybe if you jump on the bubbles, oh, you don't have a flute. There's none of that. And you could have that. And I think maybe less brave publishers or developers would have had that. They would have said, okay, we'll get stuck at this bit with the ostrich. You need to tell them what to do. Somehow, some way.
This one is one of my favorites, and I will never stop recommending this game, no matter how much people refuse to play it. Live Alive got a remake last year. First time it was officially released in the West. Live Alive is 7 different games, basically 7 stories, 7 different eras. And the gameplay varies quite a bit between those 7 stories, but they are also connected and you can play them in any order. And then there's like a final level that ties them all together. It's a really cool game. One of the stories in that game is about a caveman. And so there's no dialogue in that section. And it's completely different from the other 6 storylines. So that one's really well done. And then the weirdest one, I bet you haven't even considered this one, Subspace Emissary.
You're right.
Oh yeah, that's. I mean,
Super
I wouldn't
Smash
because
Bros.
That's
Brawl's
overrated.
campaign. Okay, how bizarre is Subspace Emissary? I don't
it
know if
is-
we'll ever have a good reason to talk about this again, but it feels like a fan YouTube supercut. Like it doesn't feel like a real video game.
It's bizarre that people wanted it back so badly. Is my hot take. I think.
It is
It's
terrible.
crap. I hate it. Not good.
It's terrible, but like
The cutscenes are good. Like
you do get to see all your favorite characters smashed together into this really weird story. There is one line of dialogue in that, so it is, but I think it still counts because it's 10 hours long and there's literally one sentence in the whole
what is the
thing.
sentence?
Do you know what it is?
Is it Snake or Pit?
It's
That's my
Snake.
guess.
Yeah, it's Snake. In the last hour of that game, you see a box and Snake pops out of it and he says, "Kept you waiting, didn't I?" That's the only line of dialogue in the whole thing.
Wow.
And then Lucario, and then he's hiding in a box and Lucario comes by and he can see through the box. Well, what a weird game. Lucario and Solid Snake are hanging out. Yeah. I just want an excuse to talk about Subspace Emissary because I can't believe it exists sometimes. Okay, that's all the ones I can think of. Is there any other ones? Any I have missed?
We haven't really touched. They probably come under the kind of it's Tetris. Why would they have them? But we haven't really touched on a lot of platformers. There's a lot of platformers that have no dialogue at all. Like obviously Spyro does, Sly Cooper does because they have kind of talking creatures. But other than some kind of occasional grunts, and sometimes the mask will give you as the player directions because you're doing it wrong. Like most of the Crash series until they get bad. Sorry, it kind of is no dialogue. I don't think
that's true. I think Cortex is always yapping.
Oh, that's true. Cortex does have lines.
Cortex is what stopped me. Because I started thinking of the first level. I was like, no dialogue, but Cortex does.
Stacey, I was thinking about this too, and then I actually found it hard to find because like even Mario has "Sorry Mario, your princess is in another castle," right? Like the original Mario has dialogue.
Does Astro have any? Astro is very fresh to bring to someone. Are there any in Astrobot?
The tree sings.
I'm not counting.
He doesn't sing words though, right?
Yes, he does.
Oh, he does. Oh,
these lyrics. Yeah, they're jamming. Sonic, the first Sonic doesn't have dialogue.
True.
Yep, that's Croc, Legend of the Gobbos. I don't think that has dialogue. We're scraping the barrel a bit here. Sorry, Croc, but.
I liked Croc. I can't remember if it has dialogue or not.
I like Croc.
I struggle to remember the older games. That's the problem. I'm always shut up on this show because you two are very in tune with. Remember this game that we played like 25 years ago? I'm just like, sure, but last week I played Astrobot during the talk.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, that is our favorite game with no dialogue. But what's your favorite game with no dialogue? Leave us a comment down below. That's it for the show. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the bell, and visit us at thegamer.com. That's The Gamer, no spaces.